I was particularly interested in the downtown area of Toronto. And the three things that interested me most at that time was technology, architecture, and public space. So within that, my interest had to do with how artists were using technology in more intimate ways, in ways through interaction where they could form a more intimate space. It started actually with a request on the part of the City of Toronto to submit a proposal. And so in that sense, you think big. You don't think of budgets, you just think of a thematic proposal. And you're also thinking about what would you like to do. You don't identify a zone or anything. It's basically it's like thinking about a public art project out there. And so and to submit 5 to 7 artists within that without any specific work. And so I selected 5 artists in particular that I wanted to pursue in the context of this thematic of the future of the present, and that there were 2 other artists also that I suggested if they would participate. And at that point, we don't touch base with the artists at all in the proposal stage. So when I was accepted, then we go through the process of inviting the artists and introducing the theme, and they determine whether they want to participate or not. And then there's another process, which was an open call and more money, where there were artists that were added because of more money, and to think about adding 4 or 5 more. And then the open call, where artists actually submitted their works to the zone that had a particular theme. So at the time, I didn't know it was Zone B. When I was thinking of the proposal in my mind, Zone B was the most appropriate for it, and it fit very well. With that thematic in mind and that perception, this thought was put out to all of the artists, and so the interpretations of that intimacy would vary. But one thing that was certain was that the artists did share this sensibility about technology in their work. So some of the binding elements were, for example, some of the artists used illusion, used the architectural framework to express that. Somebody like Rose Bond, for example, that who showed her animation film in the windows of a building, in which people could, view this kind of personal space of hers from the street. And then to move into something like Bill Byrne's audio work, where you happen to come across it at the atrium on the bay, and this sound, of the Dogs and Boats and Airplane Choir, sort of sparked them to stop and think, what is that? So that they'd stop and get more intimately involved in it. Or many of the robots, for example, of Ken Rinaldo, a way of actually interacting with technology, through this closeness to technology in the form of robots, and with many of the others. So there was sound, there was illusion, there was an animation of space, and certainly the use of architecture in major ways that provided these binding elements. What is different about a project in the public space is that there's the unknown factors, and so when you're working with public space, or a space that you would like, for the artist to work in, or the artist wants to work in, sometimes that space may not be available. So there is often a reconfiguring of the work or a rethinking of the work, for example. And so often, for the better in that sense. So the process of positioning the works is an evolving process, and the work evolves, with that space, hence the site-specific nature of it. The work of Bill Byrne's, the Dog and Boats and Planes Choir, that deals with technology's, effect. We think about the sounds. Originally, it was thought of as a performance that would be produced by the artist and with a choir master, and that the children would be on site during the night, and that's not going to be possible because parents aren't going to allow their children to be up all night for for all the hours of Nuit Blanche. And so it was at that point that we talked about it as a soundscape, that the effect would be the same, but it would also have more resonance, in a space without it being a static performance. McLuhan's massage parlor, finding the right spot for that, and we certainly ended up being in the the Metropolitan Hotel and on the second floor, it worked out considerably better because the intimacy of the space of that ballroom was far more conducive than something that would be highly public. So these elements all played into the final, the final work itself. So, in a nutshell, you're adjusting, the work according to the public space, and also you're adjusting the work to create the best kind of interactive environment for it that may not have been what was originally determined. I think Marcia McLuhan, of course, was like years, light years ahead, at that time, and he talked about artists in particular were going to be those visionaries that were going to be able to close the communication gap, and technology was this medium in which to do so. And years later, you see this happening in terms of new media work. So these pieces, these particular installations, and then the artists and the works that we eventually chose and we decided on where they went, were a means in terms of creating these kind of encounters. People would come upon them, and of course they had the directions how to do so, but you come upon them and your encounters are open-ended. It's not like you're completely directed to do something. The playfulness of the works themselves, the interactivity, also is dictated by the public and the spectator and the participant that's coming into it. So that's what I mean by the open-endedness of it. If I had to give advice to any of the young artists out there, is to be brave and not be safe with that. That's not the kind of work that is going to make a difference, in the future, and it's not the kind that's going to get that attention. Also in being true to your beliefs and what you want to do. So you'll know in using the right tools that you're using and how to get that message across. But I really stress the fact is playing it safe doesn't really get that far, and you need to have that courage and that taking that risk to get your work out there.